The marble pillar was cold against his cheek, a shock of reality in a world that had suddenly tilted on its axis. Alistair Beaumont, the Duke of Blackwood, a man who commanded armies and influenced parliaments, was hiding in his own home. What he didn't know as he listened to the venomous whispers about his bride-to-be was that the woman they were destroying was the one person who held the key to his family's oldest, most painful secret. But before we get to the moment that changed everything, you need to understand what brought the humble Alara Vance into the Duke's formidable world. It was a story no one, least of all the Duke himself, could have ever predicted. The air in Blackwood Manor was thick with the scent of beeswax and rebellion. It was the eve of the wedding, and the staff moved with a silent, resentful precision. They polished silver that had been in the Beaumont family for 200 years, preparing it for a woman they believed had been polishing boots just 6 months prior, Alara Vance. Her name was a whisper in the cavernous halls, a question mark hanging over the legacy of the Duke of Blackwood. Alistair had met her in a London bookshop, where she worked as a companion to a kind, elderly dowager. He had been drawn not to polished beauty or aristocratic grace, but to the quiet intelligence in her eyes and the gentle strength in her hands as she turned the pages of a worn poetry book. He'd proposed within 3 months, an act of madness that sent shockwaves through the ton. They called her an adventuress, a schemer of the highest order. Alistair didn't care. He was a man accustomed to getting what he wanted, and he wanted the peace he felt only in her presence. He saw past the simple brown dress and the unassuming manner. He saw a soul that felt like coming home. But even he couldn't completely ignore the weight of his world. Tonight, at the grand rehearsal dinner, he had hoped to present Alara as his undeniable choice, a woman worthy of the title of Duchess. He wanted his notoriously sharp-tongued cousin, Lady Beatrice Sterling, to finally see what he saw. Earlier that day, he'd found Alara in the West Wing, a part of the manor that had been largely shuttered for years. She was tracing the faded floral patterns on the damask wallpaper, a strange, wistful look on her face. "It feels familiar," she had said, her voice barely a murmur, "like a half-remembered dream." Alistair had smiled, taking her hand. "Perhaps you have a taste for the dramatic, my love. This wing has been empty since my uncle's family was lost." He didn't like to speak of it. The shipwreck that had claimed his uncle, his wife, and their infant daughter Seraphina 20 years ago was a wound that had never truly healed. What he didn't know was that Alara's half-remembered dream was not a dream at all. It was a memory, struggling to break through the fog of a lifetime. The truth was far closer than he could ever imagine, and it was about to be weaponized against them both. Alistair had been on his way to find Alara, to give her a small, personal gift before they faced the gauntlet of his relatives. It was a simple string of pearls, modest by his standards, but he knew she would appreciate the sentiment more than the value. As he passed the grand solarium, with its towering glass panes overlooking the rain-slicked gardens, he heard voices from within, low, conspiratorial. One was unmistakably his cousin, Lady Beatrice. The other was a man's, a grating, unpleasant tone he recognized as belonging to Mr. Silas Croft, a former estate manager his father had dismissed years ago for suspected embezzlement. Curiosity turned to a cold dread as he heard Alara's name. He stepped back, pressing himself into the alcove behind a large marble pillar, the chill of the stone seeping through his formal jacket. "The fool is utterly besotted," Beatrice hissed, her voice dripping with a contempt so potent it was almost tangible. "He truly believes she's some undiscovered gem, a virtuous commoner. If he only knew she was a gutter snipe with a fabricated past." Silas Croft chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "And you are certain her history is mutable?" Alistair's hand clenched into a fist. "Oh, it's more than mutable, Silas. It's a complete fiction," Beatrice replied, the triumph in her voice making Alistair's blood run cold. "I had my sources do some digging. The kindly old woman she was a companion to, a paid actress, the quiet village she claims to be from, they've never heard of a Vance family. She's a ghost, a nobody from nowhere." Every word was a hammer blow to Alistair's pride, to the foundation of trust he had so carefully, so recklessly built with Alara. He, the Duke of Blackwood, had been played for a fool. "And what if he doesn't believe us?" Croft asked, a hint of nervousness in his voice. He's stubborn. Beatrice's laugh was sharp and cruel. He won't have a choice. I have a signed confession from her supposed accomplice in London, the man who helped her craft the entire charade. It details everything. For a small price, he was more than willing to expose her. The Duke will see it tomorrow morning. By then, it will be too late for him to back out without immense scandal, but he will know. He will know he shackled himself to a lie. Alistair felt the air leave his lungs. A confession. Proof. The woman he was about to make his duchess was, according to them, nothing more than a cunning fraud. The pearls in his pocket suddenly felt like stones, heavy and worthless. The piece she had brought him now felt like the most elaborate deception of all. The Duke did not present the pearls. He walked into the dining hall a changed man. The warmth in his eyes, reserved only for Alara, had been extinguished, replaced by a glacial courtesy that was far crueler than any outburst. Alara, radiant in a simple gown of pale blue silk that matched her eyes, felt the shift immediately. The hand he took was cold, his smile a tight, unnatural slash across his face. "Your Grace," she murmured, a question in her eyes. "Are you unwell?" He looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time, he wasn't seeing the woman he loved. He was seeing a stranger, an actress playing a part. He saw the carefully constructed humility, the practiced innocence. "I am perfectly fine, Miss Vance," he said, the use of her formal name a deliberate, stinging slap. The rehearsal dinner was an exercise in exquisite torture. Lady Beatrice was seated across from them, her eyes glittering with a predatory light. She watched Alistair's every clipped response, every forced smile he gave his bride-to-be, and she knew her poison had found its mark. Alistair, caught between his public duty and his private turmoil, turned the conversation to Alara's past, his questions now loaded with suspicion. "Tell me again, Alara," he said, his voice deceptively casual, "about your family. You mentioned your father was a watchmaker?" Alara, sensing the trap but not understanding it, nodded. "Yes, a very fine one. He passed when I was young." "And your mother?" he pressed. "What was her name?" Alara hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Anna. Her name was Anna." Her voice was soft, but a flicker of pain crossed her face. "She used to sing me a lullaby about a ship lost at sea. It's a silly thing, I suppose." Lady Beatrice let out a delicate, mocking laugh. "How terribly common. A watchmaker's daughter and a sailor's ditty." Alistair's jaw tightened. He wanted to defend her, but the words he'd overheard echoed in his mind. A complete fiction. He felt trapped. Later, as they were shown a newly restored portrait of his great-grandfather, Alara paused. "The crest," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the corner of the painting. "The rampant lion holding a star. It's beautiful. I've seen it before. In a dream, perhaps." Alistair's reply was cold. "It is the Beaumont family crest, Alara. You have seen it on every letter I have sent you." He turned away, missing the profound confusion on her face. He saw it as another slip, another crack in her carefully crafted story. But at the back of the room, listening to it all, was Mrs. Gable, the head housekeeper. A woman who had served the Beaumonts for 50 years, and she heard not the lies of a commoner, but the echoes of a ghost. The lullaby about a lost ship, the familiarity with the family crest. A dreadful, impossible idea began to form in her mind. Have you ever felt the world turn against you for reasons you couldn't understand? That's where Alara found herself. After the disastrous dinner, she retreated to the opulent suite of rooms assigned to her, but they felt like a gilded cage. Alistair had escorted her to the door with a chilling formality. His good night, a dismissal rather than an endearment. The joy and anticipation she had felt just hours before had curdled into a thick, suffocating dread. She paced the room, the plush Aubusson carpet silencing her frantic steps. What had she done? What had she said? She replayed every moment of the evening, every word searching for a misstep, an offense she might have unknowingly committed. But there was nothing, only his sudden, inexplicable coldness. She sank onto the edge of the four-poster bed, her reflection in the grand mirror opposite showing a lost, pale girl, swallowed by the grandeur of her surroundings. She was an imposter, not because of deceit, but because she simply did not belong here. The society ladies had made that clear with their thinly veiled insults, and now Alistair, her champion, her anchor in this bewildering new world, seemed to agree with them. Her hand went to her throat, her fingers closing around the one object that was truly hers, a small silver locket, tarnished with age and worn smooth by the touch of her own hands over 20 years. It was the only thing she possessed from her parents, found with her when she was taken in by a kind but poor family after being discovered, a bewildered and silent child near a coastal village. Inside there was no portrait, only a tiny, intricate engraving of a single star. Tears finally welled in her eyes. Perhaps they were all right. Perhaps she was a fool to think she could ever be a duchess. She couldn't give Alistair the lineage, the connections, the polished history he deserved. All she had was her love for him, and now it seemed that wasn't enough. The thought of leaving, of simply disappearing back into the anonymous life she'd known, was a painful but seductive whisper. Just then, a soft knock came at the door. It was Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper, holding a tray with a steaming cup of chamomile tea. "Forgive the intrusion, miss," the older woman said, her voice a gentle balm. "You look distressed. I thought this might help you sleep." Elara tried to smile to pretend everything was fine, but a single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. "Mrs. Gable set the tray down and her kind, observant eyes fell on the locket still clutched in Elara's hand. The housekeeper's breath hitched. She stared at the familiar shape, the delicate chain. Her eyes, which had seen 2 generations of Beaumonts born and lost, widened in dawning, thunderous recognition. But she said nothing. To voice such a suspicion would be madness. First, she needed proof. Murray's. Gable's heart pounded a rhythm against her starched uniform that had nothing to do with her age. For 50 years, she had been the silent keeper of Blackwood Manor's secrets. She knew which floorboards creaked, which chimneys smoked, and which family sorrows were to be spoken of only in hushed tones. The story of the Sea Serpent, the ship that had gone down in a storm off the coast of Cornwall with Alistair's uncle, Lord Richard, his wife, and their 1-year-old daughter, Lady Seraphina, was the greatest of those sorrows. There were no survivors, or so everyone believed. The lullaby Elara had mentioned about a lost ship was a nursery rhyme Lady Richard had written herself for her daughter. Mrs. Gable remembered hearing her hum it in the halls. And the locket. Dear God, the locket. Her mind made up. She did something she hadn't done in over a decade. She took a heavy wrought iron key from a hook in her office and walked not to the Grand Public Library, but to the Duke's private study. It was a sanctuary of dark wood and leather, a place that held the soul of the Beaumont lineage. She bypassed the shelves of poetry and philosophy, heading straight for a locked rosewood cabinet in the corner. Inside were the family ledgers, bound volumes meticulously detailing every birth, death, marriage, and significant event since the first Duke of Blackwood in the 16th century. Her hands, though trembling slightly, were steady as she located the volume for the late 1790s. She turned the thick vellum pages, their corners softened by time. Her finger traced the family tree until she found it. Richard Beaumont, married to Lady Annalise. And beneath them, a single name, Seraphina Annalise Beaumont, born 1797. And there in the margins, written in the old Duke's elegant script, was a note. On the occasion of her first birthday, a silver locket was commissioned for the child, round with a chain of fine Italian make and a single star engraved within to match the star on our crest. Mrs. Gable sank into the Duke's leather chair, the book open on her lap. The description was exact. The star, the shape, it couldn't be a coincidence. It was an impossibility, a miracle wrapped in a mystery. Elara Vance was not an imposter. She was a ghost. She was Lady Seraphina Beaumont, the lost heir, returned to her home without a single memory of who she was. The housekeeper now understood the gravity of the situation. Lady Beatrice's cruel whispers weren't just social slander. They were a calculated attack to discredit a woman who had a legitimate, if forgotten, claim to a part of the Beaumont fortune. What Mrs. Gable didn't know was that the villains were about to escalate their campaign, armed with a lie so potent it could destroy everything. Confidence is a powerful intoxicant, and Lady Beatrice Sterling was drunk on it. She had seen the fracture she'd created between Alistair and his commoner fiancé. The icy silence, the strained politeness. It was all going according to her plan. But she knew the Duke's sense of honor was a formidable obstacle. To ensure he couldn't retreat from the marriage without irrefutable cause for a later annulment, she needed to deliver the final, killing blow to Alara's reputation. She and Silas Croft met in the overgrown folly at the edge of the estate's gardens, a place of crumbling stone and creeping ivy, fitting for their decaying morals. "He's shaken," Beatrice said, pulling her shawl tighter against the damp air. "But he is still a man bound by his word. We need to give him the why, the reason to cast her out the moment the vows are spoken." Croft, his eyes greedy, produced a folded piece of parchment from his coat pocket. "This, my lady, is the why." He handed it to her with a flourish. It was a letter, written on cheap, yellowed paper, its seal made from common wax. The handwriting was cramped and spidery, and it was signed by a Father Michael of a small parish in Devon. The letter was a masterpiece of character assassination. It described in sorrowful detail the life of the orphan Alara Vance. It spoke of her penchant for petty theft, her unseemly ambition, and how she had deceived and stolen from the kindly family who had taken her in, before fleeing for London to seek a greater fortune. It was the signed confession she'd bragged about, transformed into something far more official, far more damning. It painted Alara not just as a liar, but as a cruel and ungrateful parasite. "It's perfect," Beatrice breathed, a cruel smile touching her lips. "This will utterly destroy her." Later that evening, she requested a private audience with her cousin. She found Alistair staring into the fire in his study, a glass of brandy untouched beside him. She presented the letter with a performance of grave reluctance. "Alistair, it pains me to bring you this," she began, her voice laced with false sympathy. "I had my man look into Miss Vance for your protection. This arrived this evening." Alistair took the letter, his face an unreadable mask of stone. He broke the seal and read. As his eyes moved across the page, a muscle in his jaw twitched. The accusations were vile, specific, and seemingly corroborated by a man of God. It was the proof his wounded pride had been searching for. It confirmed his worst fears. But as he reached the end of the letter, his analytical mind, the mind that commanded men and managed a vast dukedom, snagged on a tiny detail. The signature, Father Michael, ended with a peculiar flourish on the L, an elegant, looping swirl that seemed utterly out of place with the rest of the cramped, crude script. It was a flourish of the aristocracy, a flourish he had seen 1,000 times before. It was the exact way Lady Beatrice signed her own name. Mrs. Gable knew she was taking the greatest risk of her long career. To approach the Duke with a wild, unsubstantiated theory based on a lullaby and a locket was to invite ridicule and immediate dismissal. But to remain silent was to allow a monstrous injustice to occur under the roof she had sworn to protect. She clutched the heavy family ledger to her chest like a shield and marched to the Duke's study. She knocked, her knuckles rapping sharply on the solid oak door. "Enter," came the clipped, weary reply. Alistair was still by the fire, the forged letter from Father Michael lying on the table beside him. He looked up, his expression annoyed. "Mrs. Gable, what is it? I am not to be disturbed." The housekeeper curtsied, her back straight, her gaze unwavering. "Your Grace, I beg your forgiveness for this intrusion. But there is something you must see, something that concerns Miss Vance." Alistair's face hardened. "I have heard quite enough about Miss Vance for one evening." He motioned to the letter. "I have all the proof I need of who and what she is." Mrs. Gable took a deep breath. "With respect, Your Grace, what you have is a lie. What I have is the truth." She did not argue or plead. She simply stepped forward and placed the open ledger on the desk in front of him, her finger pointing to the entry for his lost cousin, Serafina. She pointed to the old Duke's handwriting describing the silver locket with the star engraved within. "Please, Your Grace," she said, her voice low and steady, "before you ruin 2 lives, including your own, I implore you to look at the locket Miss Vance wears around her neck. Look at it, and then read this again." Alistair stared at the page. The words blurred, his mind reeling. The locket, Alara's constant companion, the strange familiarity she felt for the manor, the lullaby. It all coalesced with the one thing that had been bothering him, the familiar, elegant flourish on the forged letter. Doubt, a powerful and terrifying wave, crashed over the wall of his anger. Could it be possible? He looked at Mrs. Gable, seeing not just a servant, but a woman of deep loyalty and wisdom. He had to know. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Where is she?" he demanded. Mrs. Gable's face fell. "In her rooms, Your Grace." She was deeply distraught. He stormed from the study, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm of hope and fear. He needed to see the locket. He needed to see her. He threw open the doors to her suite without knocking. The rooms were silent and empty. The bed was perfectly made, and on the center of the pristine white pillow lay a single folded note. His blood ran cold as he picked it up. Her handwriting was a delicate, flowing script. "I cannot marry a man who does not trust me. I do not know what I have done, but I cannot build a life on such broken ground. Goodbye." As you might be wondering if this is the moment he gives up, if this is where pride wins. But for the Duke of Blackwood, this was the moment everything came into sharp, agonizing focus. The empty room, the quiet finality of her note. It wasn't an admission of guilt. It was the dignified retreat of a deeply wounded soul. The game was over, but he had been played, not her. Panic, an emotion Alistair Beaumont had not felt since the battlefield, seized him. He turned, the note crushed in his fist, and found Mrs. Gable standing in the doorway, her face etched with worry. "The locket," he said, his voice ragged. "Did you see what was inside?" She shook her head. "She never opens it for anyone, Your Grace. She says it feels private." That was all he needed. He sprinted from the room, his mind racing, connecting the dots with terrifying speed. The flourish on the letter, the locket, Beatrice's smug satisfaction. It was a conspiracy, and Alara was the victim, not the perpetrator. He found Lady Beatrice in the grand ballroom, directing the placement of floral arrangements for the wedding that was now a mockery. He strode toward her, his face a thundercloud. "Where is Silas Croft?" he demanded, his voice echoing in the vast empty room. Beatrice turned, startled by his ferocity. I don't know what you mean." "Do not play the fool with me, Beatrice," he snarled, holding up the forged letter. "This Ellen Michael. I've seen you sign your name 1,000 times. It's yours. This entire fabrication is yours." The color drained from her face. She saw in his eyes that the game was up. Cornered and desperate, she tried to bluff. "It's for your own good, Alistair. She's a nobody, a fortune hunter." "Her name," Alistair said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level, "is Seraphina Beaumont." He said the name, and the very air in the room seemed to change. Beatrice froze, her mouth falling open in genuine shock. She hadn't known. Her plan had been to discredit a commoner, to make Alistair see the folly of his choice so he would turn back to her. She had no idea of the true identity of the woman she was trying to destroy. That's impossible," she stammered. "She died on the Sea Serpent." At that moment, a guard appeared at the doorway, holding a struggling Silas Croft by the arm. "We found him attempting to leave the grounds, Your Grace." Alistair turned his cold gaze on the former steward. "Croft, tell me everything you know, now," the man crumbled. He confessed the entire plot, but added a chilling new detail. He had suspected Alara's true identity from the beginning. A passing resemblance to her mother, a turn of phrase. He'd confided in Beatrice, but she had dismissed it as nonsense, too focused on her own jealousy. Croft, however, had seen an opportunity. By discrediting the commoner Alara Vance, he was also ensuring the lost heir, Seraphina Beaumont, would never be in a position to reclaim her inheritance. An inheritance that Croft himself had been slowly siphoning funds from for years through legal loopholes. The truth was out. They hadn't just been trying to stop a wedding. They had been trying to erase a survivor. The world outside the manor walls was a blur of mist and moonlight. Alistair rode his stallion, Apollo, with a desperate urgency, his heart a cold stone of fear in his chest. Where would she go? A woman with no money, no connections, alone in the dark countryside. He pushed the horse harder, his mind replaying every moment he'd spent with her, searching for a clue. Then he remembered. The West Wing. The ruined chapel on the edge of the estate. The places she had been inexplicably drawn to. "It feels familiar," she had said. like a half-remembered dream. It was a long shot, but it was all he had. He veered off the main road, guiding Apollo through the overgrown path leading to the old chapel. It stood on a windswept hill, a skeleton of stone against the bruised purple sky. For a moment he saw nothing, then a flicker of movement within the crumbling archway of the entrance. It was her. He dismounted, his boots sinking into the damp earth. He approached slowly, not wanting to frighten her. Ilara wasn't crying. She stood in the center of the roofless nave, her gaze fixed on a weathered stone font near the altar. Her simple cloak was damp with mist, her hair coming undone from its neat arrangement. But she possessed a stillness, a strange sense of belonging. Ilara, he said softly. Her name felt inadequate now. She turned, her eyes wide and haunted, but not with fear of him, with a deep internal confusion. I had to come here, she whispered, her voice barely carrying on the wind. I don't know why. I feel like I've been here before. He walked to her side, his heart aching with the magnitude of what he had to tell her. He didn't offer excuses or apologies. Not yet. He simply held out the heavy family ledger, opened to the page with her name. Your name is not Ilara Vance, he said, his voice thick with emotion. It is Serafina Annalise Beaumont. This was your family's chapel. You were christened at this very font. She stared at the book, at the name written in faded ink. Serafina. The name felt like a distant bell ringing in the fog of her mind. He gently took her hand, his fingers tracing the outline of the locket at her throat. May I? He asked. She nodded, her eyes never leaving his. With trembling hands, he unclasped it. He found the tiny, almost invisible seam pressed. It sprang open. Inside, as he suspected, was not a space for a portrait, but the intricate engraving of a single, five-pointed star. He held it out for her to see, next to the drawing of the family crest in the book. The rampant lion holding an identical star. It was undeniable. The shock of it, the sheer, overwhelming weight of the revelation, was a physical blow. She staggered back, her hand flying to her mouth. And as she stared at the crest, at the locket, at the face of the man she loved, something broke loose. A memory, sharp and vivid as a shard of glass. A woman with kind blue eyes, her eyes, humming a gentle tune, the scent of salt and rain, the feeling of being held tight in loving arms. Mama, she breathed, the word a ghost on her lips. It was the first true piece of her past she had ever held. Returning to Blackwood Manor was like entering a different world. The grand halls, once intimidating and alien to Ilara, now held the faint echo of a welcome. Alistair held her hand, not as a duke condescending to a commoner, but as a man who had found his equal, his family. The wedding guests were still assembled, their mood a confused mix of gossip and anticipation. Alistair led Serafina, to the center of the grand ballroom. All conversation ceased. Lady Beatrice and Silas Croft stood to one side under guard, their faces pale masks of ruin. Alistair's voice rang out, clear and commanding. He did not shout. He did not rage. He simply told the truth. He spoke of the shipwreck that had stolen his family and the miracle that had returned one of them. He held up the ledger, presented the locket, and explained the cruel, greedy deception orchestrated by his own cousin and a disgraced former employee. The scandal was immediate and absolute. Lady Beatrice, stripped of her pride and position, was banished from the family and sent to a remote estate in the north. Her name a stain on the sterling legacy. Silas Croft was handed over to the authorities to face charges of fraud and conspiracy. Court documents would later reveal the extent of his embezzlement from the lost Beaumont inheritance, a crime that had gone undetected for nearly 2 decades. But Alistair's focus was not on punishment. It was on restoration. He turned to the woman at his side, whose quiet dignity throughout the ordeal had humbled him more than any lie. The guests watched, breathless, as the Duke of Blackwood, one of the proudest men in all of England, went down on one knee. I asked for the hand of Ilara Vance because I had fallen in love with her spirit, he said, his voice resonating with a raw, profound sincerity. Now I stand before my kin, Lady Serafina Beaumont, and I ask not just for your hand, but for your forgiveness. Forgive my doubt. Forgive my pride. I see you now, not just for who you were, but for the incredible woman you are. Tears streamed down Serafina's face, but they were tears of release, of homecoming. "There is nothing to forgive," she whispered, her voice full of a strength no one had ever suspected she possessed. The wedding did not proceed as planned. It was better. It was no longer the union of a duke and a mysterious commoner. It was the joining of two halves of a family, the healing of an old and terrible wound. As the archbishop pronounced them man and wife, a new chapter began for the House of Blackwood, one founded not on pride or duty, but on a truth that had been lost and miraculously found. In the end, Serafina Beaumont, the Duchess of Blackwood, brought more than just her lost title back to the manor. She brought compassion, resilience, and a quiet wisdom born from a life of hardship. Her story became a quiet legend, a testament to the fact that nobility is not merely a matter of birth, but of character. Alistair, humbled by his near-fatal pride, became a better man, a husband who cherished his wife's strength and spirit above all else. Her story reminds us that our true worth is not defined by the names we are given or the station we are born into. It's forged in the fires of adversity and revealed in the courage it takes to trust, to forgive, and to love against all odds. Sometimes the most powerful truths are the ones that have been whispered away, just waiting for a brave heart to listen. If this story of love and hidden truth resonated with you, please let us know in the comments below. Have you ever seen someone judged unfairly based on their past? Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories that celebrate the strength of the human spirit. Share this with someone who believes in second chances.